and we'll go. Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Shai. Welcome to Rise Beyond OCD, Answers, Insight, and Inspiration to Move Forward. Very glad you're here. Whether you're living with OCD, supporting someone you love, or working in the mental health field, this is a caring space where we can learn, connect, and find hope together. And just a quick reminder, what we share today is meant for education and support. It is not a substitute for professional care. If you ever find yourself in crisis, please reach out. You can call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline or 911 if there is immediate danger or crisis. For international support, visit findahelpline.com. Always remember you are not alone. Healing and recovery are achievable, and we are here to move forward together. Before I introduce our guest today, I'm going to go few more housekeeping items. Today's interview is being live streamed. That's where we are right now. Like all of the other interviews in this series, it will be recorded, or it is being recorded for later viewing on my YouTube channel and on my website, www.ocdrecoveryturningpoints.com. Everyone will be muted except our guest and myself, of course. And the chat room is open. I ask everyone to be respectful of others and maintain decorum. We've never had a problem with that. I do not expect that we'll have a problem with that today. We will have a Q&A, question and answer, at the end that'll be before my final question. But if you have a question for our guest, Dr. Szymanski, please put it in the chat. And if I don't see it, just, do the hand thingy and wave it violently, and I'll try to call on you. But I will monitor the Q&A, and hopefully that will proceed smoothly. All right. So I am very honored today to introduce our guest, Dr. Jeff Szymanski. Dr. Szymanski is a clinical psychologist. He's the founder of Getting to the Next Level Consulting. Dr. Szymanski has over 25 years of experience in mental health as a clinician, supervisor, trainer, and administrator. He served as the executive director of the International OCD Foundation for 15 years, which is where I met Dr. Szymanski, following his role as the director of psychological services at McLean's OCD Institute. Dr. Szymanski is a lecturer on psychology in the Department of Psychiatry, part-time, at Harvard Medical School, where he supervises pre-doctoral psychology interns through McLean's internship program. He is the author of The Perfectionist Handbook and has presented at a multitude of conferences as well as domestic and international trainings. So first, before I tell my personal story, welcome, Dr. Jeff Szymanski. It is truly an honor to have you on this interview series.
Great to see you as always, Shannon.
The personal story is Dr. Szymanski. And may I call you Jeff? Is that okay?
Everyone calls me Jeff. No one calls me
All right.
Dr. Szymanski except my mother, and I make her.
So I first met Jeff through the International OCD Foundation, the IOCDF, where he was the executive director. I had received a phone call from one of the board members, Jeff Bell. Jeff, by the way, will be one of my guests in February. But Jeff called me and said, "Hey, we saw your book. It was my first book. It'll be okay. And the IOCDF board would like to know if you'd be interested in being the keynote speaker for our conference in 2010 in Washington, D.C. You live near Washington, D.C., you're a Marine, or you were on active duty. Would you be interested?" I'm like, yes. I didn't know anybody in the larger OCD recovery community. Didn't know anyone. I just wrote my book and put it out there. The second person I talked to was you. And I will tell you, from that conversation through today, you are the person who probably single-handedly am responsible for what I do still today in the recovery community. You have always been, yes, a friend, but you've always been sort of a guiding light for me. You are calm, um, analytical, uh, a leader. You always seem to know like the direction to go. You've always been very motivational for me, but also, when I became the president of the board, you were also a good mentor for me and would say, nah, why don't we move in this direction, or why don't you handle this way? All wonderful suggestions, but you've always been sort of the person that I look to as a guide. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that role you have played in my life. And for everyone watching this, the title of my third book, Turning Points, actually came from Jeff. I had asked Jeff and Dr. Michael Janicki, who's now passed away, unfortunately, to look at the manuscript of the book, which I've written mainly when I was in Afghanistan. And they both agreed to do it. Jeff probably more receptive to doing than Dr. Janicki was. And then you wrote back, you gave me wonderful comments about the book, just substantively about the book. But then you also said, why don't you call, because I had some other title on the book, and you said, why are you not calling this book Turning Points? That's what it's about, right? In this recovery process, right? The turning points is the process. And it was a just wonderful, magical suggestion. And I took it, and that all part is history. So I just want you to know in front of everybody who is going to watch this, that you are a very important part of my life and what I do. And you always just, when I think of you, and it reminds me to keep trying to do the right thing by people who suffer. So welcome. I really, really am happy you are here. Okay, let's jump into it. I've known you going on 16 years now, and I've never asked you this question. I don't know why I've never asked you, but what inspired you to work specifically in the field of OCD treatment and recovery?
Well, I wish I had a better answer, but the answer I have is the answer I have. So when I went to graduate school, my interest was in clinical research, meaning I wanted to see what in therapy worked. And so my master's thesis was what's called a dismantling study. So we did a spider phobia, and we're like, is it cognitive restructuring that gets people better? Is it exposure therapy that gets people better? And they each just got one modality, right? What works? When we do these packages, we don't know, we're just shoving a whole bunch of things at someone. We don't know what actually works. So that was my interest. I came out of graduate school not wanting to do research anymore. So I fall into clinical work. And what I find is that there's a whole bunch of people that get terrible treatment. And they're usually the people that are the most complex and suffering the most. And so my early specialty was in dialectical behavior therapy. And it was about treating people that everyone else didn't want to work with. So I did that for a number of years. And then what I realized is I was working at an intensive outpatient program, and I was also just doing outpatient work. And what I really liked was higher level of care. And so I went back to McLean Hospital where I did my internship, and I was like, I want something residential because if you don't have at least 6 diagnoses, then it's no fun. Like I want the really complex folks. That was my passion. And the only thing they had open was the OCD Institute. And I was like, well, I've treated about 6 people with exposure therapy or with OCD. I know exposure therapy pretty well. So he goes, just go and interview there. And I went and interviewed there with Mike Janicki and other people. And I said, I don't know a ton about OCD. I'm a pretty good exposure therapist, but like just wanting to be clear about kind of what my skills are. And I'm really interested in working with complex cases. And I like this residential idea where you're a treatment refractory, you come here because outpatient therapy doesn't work. That's my bag. And they said, look, the reason we want you here is because you have all this DBT background. And we want you to work with the complex cases that some of the other therapists with straight exposure experience aren't doing well with. And I was like, all right, so I'll go there. I'll spend a couple of years. I don't want to work with just one disorder. This is back in 2001, and just love the community, right? And so the OCD community is a very unique community, I found. Again, uniquely underserved, poorly treated, get terrible care. And so that hits all my buttons of like people that are suffering, particularly and this is what Mike Jenneke and I really bonded around, right? Is this should not be happening. The people that are the most vulnerable, that are struggling the most, should not be the ones that are left behind. So I was at the Institute from 2001 to 2008. And so what I say about my journey is what got me into the foundation is the same thing that got me out of the foundation. What got me into the foundation is dissemination, because I was working with people that weren't treatment refractory. They never had good treatment. And because people out in the mental health community didn't know how to treat OCD. So I was like, well, I can see 5 patients a week, or I can see if I can disseminate exposure therapy on a broader scale. And the foundation at that time was kind of getting a reboot. And so I put my hat in the ring. And the first thing I did was to expand the Behavior Therapy Training Institute. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, so when I hear you say I'm impactful and inspiring, I'm like, yay, you're taking what I've taught you and you're just disseminating on a wider scale. So I like this idea that, we can work together, not as 5 people or 10 people or 12 people, but we work together as thousands of people and tens of thousands of people. That's my goal. So at the end of my tenure at the foundation, I was like, holy crap, there are a lot of people trained. And now it isn't so much about getting more people trained, it's about getting them trained well. Right. And so I was looking at you sent me the questions up front. So we're going to talk a little bit about my concern about therapists. We have so many more people trained, but they're like not quite there for more complex cases. So that's the goal of my consulting business.
Okay, so you've spent more than, so thank you for not spilling the beans on the rest of the question. You've spent more than 25 years working closely with people who live with OCD and anxiety. So, to begin, what has this work taught you about the courage it takes just to move through daily life with OCD?
So courage is an interesting word, because what I find so fascinating the longer I'm in this field is how hard people are already working and how courageous they are already being. It's just about like Patrick McGrath's phrase of like, don't try harder, try different. So I don't think it's about like work harder, try harder, do more. I think it's about how you are strategic. But I think people are already courageous. I think they're already working hard. And I think that's the issue is I'm not getting the results I want, so I'm doing something wrong. No, you're busting your butt. But yeah, no one's taught you a way where you can actually get traction with what you're doing.
And then building on that, as you look back across your career from McLean to the IOCDF to now your consulting work and your work as a professor too. I mean that because that's a great stage for somebody particularly like you, right? Because uh, I can only see you as like this Socratic type of teacher who's getting people to think. What experiences have most shaped the way that you understand OCD and the people who have it live with it?
I'll borrow from Mike Jenneke. I think that a number of factors create a perfect storm for people with OCD to uh, experience such profound suffering and anguish because of this. The nature and the content of the symptoms is so foreign. That's the point of the disorder. It's foreign. It's what we call ego dystonic. It's embarrassing. It's upsetting. It's mortifying. It's whatever else. And because I'm experiencing this and I don't know why, and my goal, if you talk with people with OCD, what do you want to be in the world? I just want to be a good person. I've heard that from literally 100% of people that I've worked with OCD. So their goal, their value is to be a good person. And then they have this weird counter experience going on inside, and then they can't tell anyone, right? And so the suffering, the isolation, the like, I don't use the phrase anymore, OCD bully and OCD monster. I understand where it comes from. It feels like a monster, right? But one of the things I'm finding is when we treat our interior as a monster, I don't know that I want to walk around with a monster. I think I want to think about my interior and the signals that I get. They're well intentioned but misinformed. So I don't believe in this whole like people, undermine themselves or self-sabotage. I don't believe in any of that. I believe every one of our intentions internally is trying to tell us something, but the signal's wrong, or the voice is wrong, or the aim is wrong, or unhelpful, right? So I don't do monster and bully anymore. I'm like, what's that signal telling you? And how do you reconcile that with who you are and who you want to be? And that's where then I fell into ACT, because in ACT, when you do exposure therapy, everything is contextualized in who do you want to be. And most people with OCD are really clear about what that is.
ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, right?
So, yeah,
That's the acronym, right? For everybody,
exactly.
anyone who doesn't know that. So, um, and then compared to when you first entered the field, what gives you the most hope today about OCD, how it's understood, and how it's treated? What gives you the most hope about that?
Yeah, I think so. In the early days in 2001, I mean, geez, the early research on exposure therapy and medication was in the mid 80s. That's like 40 years ago. Did I do my math right? So that's nuts,
Yeah.
right? Like no one could treat people with OCD prior to the early 80s because there were no effective treatments. So people languished in talk therapy and psychodynamic therapy, never getting any better. And so when I showed up at the Institute, there was still this enthusiasm of like ERP really fixes people. And it does. And a couple years in, what I realized is that the goal was, if you're not responding to outpatient exposure therapy, push you up to residential, we'll just do more of it and we'll just structure the environment more. And that did work for some people and it didn't work for other people. And so I started to look at, again, back to my like, what actually is going on in psychotherapy and what are the active ingredients, right? And so exposure therapy, if someone shows up and they're ready to go, they did great. And the people that showed up and were like, what do you mean I have to be more anxious in order to not be anxious? And those people really struggled. And again, that was my pivot into acceptance and commitment therapy because it gave me another approach, right? And so what you're seeing evolutionarily in the last 25 years is, while we talk about exposure therapy being the gold standard, there's a lot of other approaches. There's a lot of other, like if someone comes to me and says, I've done ERP and it didn't work for me, I don't go, I don't know what to do then, right? We have lots of other tools. There's inference-based cognitive behavior therapy. There's other biologically based interventions. There's more nuance in how you do exposure therapy. We'll talk a little bit about inhibitory learning as we go along. But that line of research really looked at the original understanding of how exposure and response prevention worked. They're like, for 70% of people, we get a 50 to 70% symptom reduction. And I'm like, that's great for your research grant. That's not great if this is my kid, right? And so Michelle Krass came along and said, hey, like, how can we get better? Like, this is a great treatment and it changes lives, but how can we make this better? How can we reduce treatment dropout and treatment compliance issues and get people more engaged and get people closer to 100%? And so she found some anomalies in how we started to think about exposure therapy. And when you get that innovation and that forward thinking and that like bring more things to the table and let's see how much better we can do stuff, when that attitude, and you see more and more of that in the field now. The other trend that's happening that's wild is 10 years ago, I knew maybe 5 to 10 therapists who had OCD that would admit that they had OCD. And I probably knew more than most people because of where I sat at the foundation. I see about 50 therapists every month now. A third of them have OCD. Like
That's
I
amazing.
went through this experience and I don't want people to go through what I went through and I want to change things. That was a huge shift in the field exponentially.
And that something that many people with OCD struggle with is feeling like they're failing, right? Failing small f, failing uh, at recovery. They're failing at recovery when symptoms flare up, when someone is being very hard on themselves because of this. And I personally experienced this, but when you're being so hard on yourself because it doesn't feel like it's working and you're not, it doesn't feel, OCD will tell you this a lot, you're not doing it right, so it's never going to work. When someone's being very hard on themselves, how do you help them rethink these setbacks in a more compassionate way?
So let's go back to Michelle Krask's inhibitory learning theory. What she found, which resonates with most people when you hear it, you don't unlearn things, right? So the original idea in exposure therapy is that we're going to unhook this through exposures. We're going to tell our amygdala, hey, this fear signal that keeps on going on, you don't need to do that in this situation. Like these things need to be separated. Michelle's like, once you learn something, you don't unlearn it. So here's the way I think about it. When you're 5, you have a whole bucket of experiences of how you understand the world. And when you're 15, you have 10 more years of experiences about how the world works. And so we grow up and we have all these buckets of experience. And so what she says is it's like you go into a situation and that situation pulls for an old bucket or a medium-sized bucket or an early bucket, right? So we don't, um, what goes to the front isn't always what we want to go to the front. So, for example, I'm going to teach someone how to play tennis, and we're out in the summer, and they're beautiful days, and we're hard court, and man, this tennis player got so much better. And then we go to another tennis court, and it's a clay court, and it's windy, and they're playing terrible. And I'm like, why do you suck? You were so much better yesterday, right? So in in inhibitory learning, what we're saying is you have to take what you've learned over here and you have to actively generalize your skills over here, right? So it isn't a relapse, it isn't a setback. It's old learning just got pulled in this new environment, and we just go, oh, I know how to deal with this. I just have to like go back and do my homework and move it over here. So I don't even use the word relapse anymore. I go, oh, old learning just showed up. And so we just generalize our skills in therapy to something new.
That is an amazing perspective. I hadn't even thought about that because I do talk about setbacks, but I talk about it in a different way. Like it's evidence that you made progress, right? You
Hmm.
can't have a setback unless you did it before. So let's learn how to do it here now. But I love that perspective.
Well, so and
It-
then let me talk a little bit because this shows up just kind of across the board with anxiety disorders, I feel like. Begin to have a conversation with your self-critic. And what I mean by that is most of our self-critic is a very old learning part, right? That punishment is what motivates, right? Because it was done to us, it was taught to us, or we somehow were like, if I try harder, if I weren't so lazy. But reflect on that, right? When your self-critic shows up and is loud, does it actually motivate? Does it actually propel? Does it actually teach you anything? In fact, what we know about punishment is punishment doesn't teach you what to do differently. It just teaches you not to do that. So there is an investment in like an eye for an eye, like you did something bad, you should be punished. When you punish yourself, how do you feel? Unmotivated, demoralized, I feel bad about myself. How does that help in needing that energy and that motivation to do this hard work? So maybe we go, I get it, self-critic. I get that you want us to do better. I'm not sure I'm going to listen to you today about how to do that. Maybe the way to do that is to generalize my skills into this other situation because that's how learning works.
you just reminded me of why I have so many different experts on here for in this community because everybody is impactful in their own way in the community. But when I put all of you together, you get so many different insights and perspectives,
Mm,
right? And part of the audience, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but part of the audience for these videos will be new therapists. And I think
hmm
it's a great lesson for them to have an open mind about new ways of helping people. That's the best way for me to put it. New
Yep.
ways of helping people. Don't become so entrenched in your way because somebody else. I mean, this is an evolving thing. So I talk to a lot of people in just providing peer support who I think suffer may be the wrong word, but they're burdened by perfectionism. Um, in your book, The Perfectionist Handbook, you talk about the difference between healthy striving and self pressure. Does perfectionism relate to OCD in any way? First question. Does perfectionism relate to OCD in any way? And if so, how do you see perfectionism interacting with OCD in ways that can keep people stuck. And a question I didn't even put in here, but it's kind of the obvious follow on. Then what do we do about it, right? So I know you're smart, so you can track the questions. But does perfectionism relate to OCD in any way? And if so, how do you see perfectionism interacting with OCD in ways that can keep people stuck?
So I'm going to tie two questions together. So when we go back to the 80s and the DSM, obsessive compulsive disorder, obsessions were defined as anything that happened inside, and compulsions were anything that happened outside. So when you hear the term pure obsessional, that's from that old way that they thought of the diagnosis. So then you move forward, and now it's no, because ERP came in and they're like, hey, if we don't have a compulsion to prevent, then we can't do ERP with pure obsessionals. And so the behaviorists came in and they're like, no, 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 you can have behavior internally, right? You can have an automatic intrusive experience, and then you can have a deliberate, purposeful experience. And when you have a deliberate, purposeful experience, oh, I just had that unpleasant image. Now I have to pray. The now I am choosing to pray is a compulsion because you're choosing to do it even though it's in your interior, right? So now we have, ooh, now this fits exposure response prevention. So the next evolution is we all thought that all OCD was always ego dystonic, which means everything I'm experiencing is not me. That turned out to not be the case. And perfectionism in the context of OCD is an example of that. Of some of it is like, ooh, I get that that doesn't make sense and I shouldn't be doing that. But don't you dare take away this other stuff that I really like. This is how I got competent. This is how I got. We were coaching another keynote speaker a few years back, and he's like, "Yeah, my OCD is my superpower." And I was like, "No, no, it's not. Your OCD is what causes you difficulty. This other stuff are the your better attributes, but they're not your OCD." But so what I learned to do with perfectionists is to say, let's figure out where your perfectionism works and where it's costing you. And where it works, we're not going to touch, and where it's costing you, we're going to go after it. So definitely perfectionism falls under the OCD umbrella, the degree to which there's lots of intrusive obsessions. I'm going to make a mistake. It'll be terrible. It'll be catastrophic. And then lots of repeating, lots of checking, right? So it can fall under the OCD rubric. But again, it's trickier because if you're going to challenge my symptoms, I don't want violent images. Get rid of all of those. But my perfectionism, right? You have to be more nuanced about it than that. And then the field also, again, continues to evolve. So we used to call it compulsive hoarding, and it was under OCD. Now, hoarding disorder is its own disorder, right? So it's important that we don't get stuck in the way we're thinking now is the best way, because every time we evolve, we get smarter.
And even after all these years, there's a lot of myths about OCD, and they're everywhere. What are a few misconceptions you still come across, even among professionals, about OCD, and how do those myths affect people seeking treatment?
So I went to my mother's 80th birthday party last year. And after the party, a bunch of family had flown out. And so friends kind of left for the day, and we hung out for the weekend. And I'm actually fairly quiet in social situations, even with my family. And something about psychology came up. And I went to answer the question, and like three other people just stepped in with all of their very strongly held opinions about this issue in psychology. And I'm like, I've been a psychologist for 30 years, but okay. Now, the reason I tell that story is that everyone thinks they're a psychologist, don't they? Everyone thinks that they know how the mind works. Everyone thinks they know how things work. And that's fine. Um, but the problem with that is that it then goes, oh, I've read about OCD. I have a little OCD, right? I obsess a little bit. I would like things neat. And so what happens is in that attempt to, I've got it figured out. It's called folk psychology. It's like the lay person walking around going, I know how things work. And in your attempt to understand and I think empathize with someone, I think you miss it and I think you dismiss it, right? And so again, the myths come from, I know how things work. And you're like, actually, you don't. And I hope you're interested in learning more. That's what we liked about the foundation is You're like, I don't know if that's terribly accurate. Are you curious to find out more information?
Let's jump into recovery a little bit more intensively here and talk about fear and progress and resilience. For someone who feels overwhelmed by compulsions or just uncertainty, I mean, just the aura of uncertainty about things, maybe they don't even feel ready to try an exposure yet. What's one compassionate first step that you encourage them to take in order to enter into this scary world of exposures?
All right. So I'm going to part company with some folks. Exposure response prevention is a technique. Tell me your obsession, tell me your compulsion. We will design an experience where we trigger the obsession, we will block the compulsion, you will habituate, and over time, you will have less of something. You'll have less of those thoughts, you'll have less compulsions, you'll have less anxiety. It's a reduction model. My model is a mechanism model, it's not a technique. And what I mean by that is that for me, exposure therapy means when something shows up, and the person is trying to get away from it and turn away from it. My goal as an exposure therapist is to say, can we turn back towards that thing that you're about to push away? And as much as possible, can we be willing and open and curious about it? Because our goal is what can we learn? What can we learn new about this experience? Because when we avoid, we're going to learn as much as we're ever going to know about that situation. And on top of that, our mind starts to elaborate on possibilities and probabilities. And so now we're living with things that don't feel um, unlikely, they feel very likely. So exposure therapy is let's find out how likely it is. So my model is an additive model. How do we turn our attention back towards something that is anxiety provoking with curiosity and willingness, with the goal of learning something new about ourselves, our mind, how the world works, how our emotions work. And so it's very much a engage in the world, try new things that will counter what your mind is trying to tell you is true and accurate.
I love that. That's a great perspective to have. That's what can we learn from this? Um,
So
Even
why
though
don't
it's scary.
so early on, people are saying, I don't want to do exposure therapy. And I'm like, we're kind of doing it. When you talked about that difficult feeling, and I asked you to let it be and to allow it to have space, and you got curious and you unpacked it. Oh, and I think that's from my, that last experience I had a year ago, and they're talking about it, they're experiencing it. That's exposure therapy to me. They're not pushing it away, they're not doing compulsive behaviors, but you can do it in the room. You don't have to do a structured exposure. I still do structured exposures. But again, anytime something shows up and someone starts to move, I go, can we turn back?
And part of this struggle, this process, this journey is trying to reconnect with what you believed were your values as a human
Yep.
being, right? So, and you've seen many people make meaningful progress after long periods of struggle, right? You've been particularly at the foundation and you've like got your eyes on everything. You've seen people make progress. What tends to help people reconnect with their values or their purpose in the middle of this difficult recovery process?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that that's what's missing in traditional exposure therapy is that we should be starting with values. We shouldn't be starting with exposure therapy. Again, I'm parting company with some folks here. But for me, if I'm going to do something hard and scary, I better have a carrot. If I'm getting up in the morning and I'm told to eat a banana, I'm like, why am I eating this damn banana? Oh, right, because I'm dieting, because I have high cholesterol, because I have heart disease, because, right, I'm doing this for a reason, right? So I always start with, let's be clear about what your life is supposed to look like. What do you want it to look like? What are you willing to fight for? Now, do you want to spend time with your kid? Or do you want to be in the bathroom washing your hands? Up to you. But I want you to see that are you willing to experience discomfort in order to engage with your kid? So that's how I do exposure therapy. You start with values first.
Okay, then now let's talk about difficulty. Therapy can bring up fear, exhaustion, even grief over time lost to OCD. You and I both have talked to any number of people who just they look back and said, OCD has stolen so many years from me. How do you talk with patients about those emotional realities in a way that supports them rather than puts pressure on them about dealing with fear, exhaustion, grief, all of that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the other, probably the most powerful learning I had as a therapist, again, was kind of this pivot into incorporating acceptance and commitment therapy into what I do. Because when you do traditional ERP and traditional CBT, the client comes in, it's a very medical model. And the client comes in and they're like, I'm struggling, you're an expert, fix it. And you go, I'm smart, I went to graduate school, I have all the right answers, I'm going to fix you. You just got to do what I tell you to do, right? Some people get better that way. The problem for me is that when you sit in that space, you're kind of determining for the person what is good and bad, what's effective and not effective, what's normal and not normal. I would rather, when I start with values, and then they're clear about like spending time with my kid or my job or whatever it is, and they say, I'm thinking of doing this, I always go, does that move you towards your values and towards what you want, or is this moving you away? It's up to you. What do you want to do? Now, if you want to move towards, I'm here with you. If you want to move away, like we should be talking about the pros and cons of ongoing avoidance. And let's do an exercise. If you're still avoiding in this circumstance, and this value is really important, but right now you're struggling to take that risk, what happens a year from now? What happens 5 years from now? What happens 10 years from now? You don't want to be one of those people who turns back and says, I lost 10 years of my life. Like it's time, isn't it? But that's how you have to contextualize it with values.
That's awesome. And I think it's a natural transition into the next question, which is about hope. Um, Hope was probably the most powerful thing for me. I didn't even when I I got treated way back in the late 1900s. Right, that's the way it sounds like. Um, my doctors weren't they were Navy doctors, right? And not to belittle Navy doctors, but and I understand that this was actually one of the ways it was described back then. Charlie Mansueto told me this, but my doctors didn't use cognitive behavioral therapy, that term. They said behavioral therapy, right? We didn't talk about ERP. It wasn't even on the radar of anything that we did. Um, the day after I was diagnosed, I read in a book in a bookstore, not on my smartphone, which I didn't have, but I went to a bookstore, read about OCD, and the first thing I read was OCD cannot be cured. And I can't tell you, I mean, words don't even accurately describe how I felt at that moment. I was so demoralized. And I had just told this doctor who had the power of kicking me out of the Marine Corps all of these bizarre thoughts and behaviors, right? And he didn't say a word about cure. So he calmed me down a little bit, gave me some, words that gave me some comfort. What he told me was it is possible to get better, right? It's possible to recover. That's all he told me. And I said in my mind at that point, if that's true, I'll do whatever it is because I'm living in hell right now. And so I didn't know what I was doing was actually going to work. I just knew this doctor told me that it was possible. But that served sort of like as this lighthouse
Mm-hmm.
light showing in this dark stormy sea. Just remember what your doctor said. And I learned through what I did that it is true. It is true. Recovery is achievable. So the question for you, what would you say to someone watching who feels like they've tried everything, and is starting to lose hope that recovery is possible or achievable? They're losing hope. What do you tell them?
So, well, let's start with your story. Let's say you spend 5 years learning Spanish. Do you want a year later, you stopped learning and speaking Spanish, but you spent 5 years practicing it? A year later, it's all gone. Does that happen? No.
No.
Because what if all of this is a learning model? And we go back to Michelle Krask's stuff, which is it isn't about OCD can't be cured. It's about we have all this old learning. And the more we engage with the old learning, the more we add to the bucket, the louder it's going to be. And so when we learn this new stuff, that's the name of the theory. When we learn new ways of responding, it inhibits but doesn't get rid of old learning. That's not true for people with OCD. That's true for all of us and everything that we do. We don't want to forget. We don't want things to go away because that we want our mind to be active because sometimes it's right about really important things. So I think of our minds as like an email box, right? An email inbox. You get an email and you're like, your gas is going to be shut off if you don't pay your bill. I'm going to open that email. I'm going to respond. I'm going to engage. I'm going to do stuff. Another email, you have 40% off at Kohl's. I'm like, I don't really even like Kohl's, but 40% off. I'll get to that on Tuesday. And then you have an email that's like, um, you know, uh, car insurance, 0% in your state. And I'm like, that sounds like spam. I don't even think I should open that. And then you get one that's like, this is the IRS and send us your social security number and you're getting phished. And you're like, I don't think I should touch that at all. Right. So if I open that up, I create a whole thing. What if our minds are like that? What if we get good information, middle kinds of information, not helpful information, and really unhelpful information? And so our job in this is to watch how things show up and figure out what we want to engage with. So again, it was the same thing at the Institute. That's where you went when everything else was tried. And still some people got better, didn't get better. I don't know that it's a get better or not get better. I don't know that it's a binary. I think that it's a, if I'm working really hard and I'm not getting better, what can I do different? And I don't know that I need to blame myself. But if I'm in therapy and I'm not getting better and I'm not getting my life back, I should try another therapist.
Yeah. If nothing changes, nothing changes, right? So
Nothing changes, nothing changes. And yeah, the blame game just doesn't do anything. But people get attached to their therapists, but yay, but not if not if you're not getting better, right? And so I say that to all my therapists all the time. I'm like, if your clients are moving, they're moving. If they're stuck, you know they're stuck, they know they're stuck. And that's a really important conversation you need to stop everything and you need to have. Do we need to continue? Am I the right person? Is this the right modality? Do I have enough skills? All that stuff.
yeah, and it's human nature. We'll get to therapists in a minute, but it's human nature for everybody to think, no, I can't be the problem, right? I'm not, it's not me, right?
Yep.
And I think it's helpful to like be introspective in this regard and say, maybe I am, maybe I'm at least part of the problem.
Hmm.
All right, let's switch to families and loved ones. Um, Specifically people who are supporting a loved one who has OCD. And many families and partners want to help, but they can't always see what their loved one is going through internally. Um, and I say it all the time, unless you have this disorder, you really don't know what that fear feels like. And it's not, and I tell people who I support, it's not your family's fault, right? That it's not their fault that they don't truly understand because I don't know that anybody can understand it unless they have it. What do you wish more families understood about what OCD feels like from the inside?
Well, a couple things. When I do a training with therapists, I sometimes will start and go, I want you as a therapist, whether you have OCD or not, is not the point I'm trying to make. I want you to think about a time in your life where you lost a pet, where you lost a job, where you had a broken relationship, and that point in the morning where you wake up and then it hits you about how awful everything feels, right? There's a version of that experience that people with OCD experience,
Yeah.
right? Now, I know why I'm feeling this way is a little more tolerable than I don't know why I'm feeling this way and I'm feeling it intensely and I'm feeling it every day and I'm feeling it over and over and over again, right? So I try and help with that analogy. I think the other thing that happens is, and but I'll also say it was so interesting at the institute when people there would be a group where we encourage people to talk about their symptoms, and 9 times out of 10, someone in the room would be like, "Your OCD is weird," and they're like, "No, your OCD is weird." And it was like we all understand we're in the same soup, but when we hear the content, we're like, because I don't have that lens, it doesn't make sense to me. But I can be empathic towards someone who's afraid of spiders if I'm not afraid of spiders. It is the taking the step of like getting in someone's shoes and finding some place we're all built very similarly in lots of ways. When you're really anxious, what is that experience like? Now imagine that every day for the last 10 years, right? So you also, I like talking about history because I'm old, but you also see two traditions happening in mental health. So the old white guy psychiatric individual therapy, confidentiality, identified patient that we're going to treat who is broken is one modality. And then, which has evolved, but still it's the individual. The individual has OCD. We're going to have the individual fix it, and we're going to fix the individual. And then you have more community-based and systems people and family people and social work people, and they're kind of over here in their own tradition. And what's lovely is you see, I mean, Barbara Van Appen in the 90s was the pioneer in research about what's going on in the family system. This is not located in the person. This is a systems issue. And if you don't treat the system, the person's not going to get as better as they could otherwise. In 2006, Perry Merlin and I set up a family therapy program as part of the institute. We rewrote the social workers' job descriptions and they all became family therapists and got trained in family therapy because we were like, we're treating the individual, we're sending them back to their families, and 6 months later they're coming back. I wonder why. Now you're seeing this pretty impressive uh, convergence of understanding that this is a systemic issue, right? And there's great books, Alec Pollard, Ellie Leibovitz, John Abramowitz, John Hirschfield, you've had on, all have written books on what family members can do. And it really is like, you know, so what I say when I work with family members, I'm the Oprah of treatment plans. I'm like, you got a treatment plan and you got a treatment plan and you got a treatment plan, right? So when your kid is asking for accommodation and you're stuck trying to figure out whether to give the accommodation or not, and you've heard me say you shouldn't be giving accommodation, and you end up giving accommodation, you have your own distress that you have to manage, right? You're not that far from your kid, right? You have your own, like, what am I doing with this difficult feeling when I'm accommodating? I'm doing my own version of avoidance, right? So it's about bringing as much as possible when it makes sense. I bring in families and I educate them. This is what's going on. This is what you can do. This is why what you've been doing doesn't work. This is what you can do instead. And they can kind of pop in. We don't break confidentiality. Um, we use them in session when it's appropriate as exposures, all that good stuff.
And that's one thing that I think you did a lot of things great when you were the executive director, but I had the opportunity because I was on the board, but to be able to watch this close up, I think the foundation does a really good job with this. You particularly did a great job of balancing, the audiences that the foundation reached out to, people who have OCD, the therapists, like on both extremes, and then right there in the middle, the family. You did a great job with that. And, the I haven't been to any other big mental health conferences like the IOCDF conference, annual conference, but it seems to me to be pretty unique in this sense that it is a conference for the people who suffer, the therapist and their family members. And each one has a major part in that conference, and it's a major audience targeted. And it's also a place where people, when they come to it, and you did a great job when you were the ED for this, it was a great, people did not want to leave
Mm,
that space at the end
mhm,
of that long weekend. They didn't want to leave because everybody felt like somebody was saying something that resonated to
mhm,
them, including therapists, right? Everyone took something away from it. And it was just like whether this was a good thing or a bad thing, it was a safe place for
mhm.
people who felt all of this fear. I'm going to move on to training here because I want to be
Well,
conscious of time.
let me speak to that a little bit because I think I do think it's relatively unique in the mental health space. And I don't take credit for that. That was Patty Perkins and Mike Janicki, and that everyone has something important to say, and that we learn from each other. And Mike was so egalitarian, and that leveling the playing field, I loved. So when I took over, I was the one who came up with the idea of tracking that conference, right? So there's the professionals, there's the individual experience, there's the family, because everyone had something. And we also innovated the multi-perspective talks. I have OCD, and here's my therapist, and here's the parent, right? And to
Yeah.
hear those different voices instead of that medical model of I'm the professional and I'm smart and I will fix you, poor broken thing. It's when everyone has something important to say. Man, it got better and smarter and more effective, and communities got built. And you're right, like that sense of um, everyone has something important to say. I think it is a huge uh, uh, shift and something uniquely important about when I was there at the foundation.
All right. Let's move to training and the future of care. And Jeff, if there's anything that we I gloss over that you really want to talk about it, do what you always did and say, Shannon, can you be quiet for a second and let me say this? You'd be perfectly welcome to do that. Um, you spent many years leading the IOCDF and working within major treatment programs. Looking back, what changes in the field are you most proud to have witnessed or helped shape?
So I think community building was a big deal. The affiliate program was pretty broken, not very active. There are how many affiliates now? They do tons of different things. You have these local communities. The community in and of itself is much larger. The virtual community, just access to each other is really important. So for me, the kind of community sense is one of the things
Yeah.
I'm proudest of there because I really prioritize that. Um, the other piece is, again, I remember, I don't know if I'm exaggerating, but back in the early 2000s, there were maybe 200 of us that were treating OCD with ERP. I'm in a Facebook group. There are 5,500 clinicians in that Facebook group. It's wild.
Wow.
Yeah, like just the number of people that are coming to the field that want this experience, that want to learn, want to know. The Behavior Therapy Training Institute was the only thing between 1995 and probably 2020. We were the only place that did ERP training. And in that Facebook group, you go in and someone's like, I want a training in ERP, and it gets flooded with like 20 opportunities. I started really pushing this consultation thing that not a lot of people were doing 3 years ago. And now I'm training senior therapists as consultants because I'm always full, right? People want to get better. Therapists want to get better at what they're doing. So this incredible interest in learning about it, disseminating it, and again, doing it well, I think is the thing I'm the most excited about. And that energy continues to. So you hang with the kind of senior crowd in many ways. Not all of them, but like Liz and John and some of those folks are kind of mid-level. But there are a bunch of mid-career therapists that are just knocking my socks off, just so skilled and so passionate and
Yeah.
it would again, there were so few of us. You went to the conference and you met everyone who was in the OCD therapy community. I mean, it was kind of wild.
Yeah, it really is. I love watching just this thing continue to branch and branch and branch. Um, and what I tell people all the time is if you have OCD, you need to be seen by a therapist who is specially trained in
Mhm.
the diagnosis and treatment of OCD, right? It is a particular science and art. And I'll stand by that because there are so many things that could go south if you're not dealing with the right person. So if you are a therapist out there and you're not in the OCD world and you're watching this, what I would say to you is find out how to get trained specifically in this field. It will help you and it will help the people that you help. Um,
Well, and so to piggyback on that, here's how I get people to kind of again see it. We see the wisdom over here. Just bring it over here. It's the same process. How many people do you know at night they go to bed, they lay down, and they go, "Okay, brain, we're going to go to sleep," and they go right to sleep? No one.
no one.
Why? Because our sleep center doesn't understand English, right? And so we can't have a conversation with parts of our brain using language. Our amygdala, who's sending us all these signals, doesn't understand English. It only understands behavior. And so talk therapy doesn't work because we're targeting the wrong process. Just like arguing with our brain about why we should be able to fall asleep. The more we argue with our brain, actually, the less sleep we're going to get. That's exactly what happens with OCD. The more we talk about it, the bigger it gets. The talking isn't the way out of this cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. I do, won't find any room for disagreement by me on that. And looking at what is still needed, then perfect segue, right? You're like perfect at setting up the next question. Um, Looking at what is still needed, where do you still see the biggest gaps in access to high quality OCD treatment? And what changes do you think would make the greatest difference in this?
In terms of thinking broader, so again, I just keep going back to in 2012, 13, 14, we were fundraising for scholarships to fund a therapist to attend the Behavior Therapy Training Institute to be the first OCD trained therapist in an entire state. This is 10 years ago, right? So now we have more people in the fray. So in the way that you talked about in your other questions, we have to be clear about what it is and what it isn't. We have to be clear about what treatments work and don't work without being divisive and tribal, right? We have to be open to new perspectives without, letting go of quality control. So it really is about more broadly, we're seeing the trend, but more broadly, more people getting access again to better quality care. It isn't just my bar is not getting into exposure therapy. My bar is getting into effective exposure therapy because, like anything, it can be done poorly. And sometimes the therapist is not that good, and sometimes the training was not that good. And again, that was the impetus of me running my business. Is we have a lot of exposure therapists out there and they're good with like this range. I want everyone good at this range. I want everyone good working for everyone. So the biggest gap for me is just really increasing the skill level of the people that have some other good training. There used to be giant wait lists for ERP therapists. Not so much anymore. Now, accessibility in terms of money, because most specialists go into specialties so that they can do self-pay. Because if you take insurance, you can't pay your bills because insurance doesn't pay their bills. They lie, they cut people off, they claw back. Someone was telling me 3 years later, an insurance company was like, "You owe us $3,000." And they're like, "You paid these bills. I don't even see this client anymore." So like the level of criminal behavior on the part of insurance companies is wild and that they can get away with it in mental health care. So I think insurance companies are actually the biggest obstacle to effective care because if you want to be able to make a living and pay your student loan, you are going to specialize and you're going to have a fee and it won't be a $10 copay.
Yeah, access to care is one of the reasons everybody knows, and I tell everybody I'm not a therapist. I am not a therapist. This is not therapy. I am not going to treat you. I want you to see a therapist, but a lot of people come to me sort of like as that buoy
Totally.
because they can't afford
Yeah.
a therapist, which the therapist would be like, I'd love to take insurance, but it's just
Yeah.
it's unreasonable. So, and that's not for every therapist. There are therapists out there who do take insurance. All right,
Well,
let's
no,
talk
here,
about more about therapists. You've trained and supervised many clinicians over the years. From your perspective, what qualities, and this is really for the therapist, this is targeted to the therapist who will watch this. What qualities or attitudes really distinguish therapists who are especially effective in working with OCD?
curiosity, willing to learn. That's it. You have to be curious and you have to be willing to learn. Don't think you know stuff. Always be open both to learning new things, getting better, and to listening to your client. So I'm on that Facebook group, and sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it's not. And people are like, I need a protocol for treating contamination OCD. And I'm like, not all contamination OCD shows up the same way. Talk to your client, be curious. You don't need to ask us for an exposure. Ask your client for an exposure. What are they not doing that they would like to be doing, but their contamination obsessions are showing up? That's your exposure, right?
Right.
So when you're curious and you're willing to learn, you're going to be an awesome therapist.
And when you are supervising young therapists, what mindset or lessons do you most hope that they carry with them throughout their careers?
Well, that we want to model for our clients that we are experimenting, trying, and seeing what happens. And so a therapist will say, "Oh my God, I made the worst mistake." And I'm like, "Really? You tried an intervention, good intentions, you had a good conceptualization, you had a good reason, and it fell flat. What did you learn from that? How do you pick that up and how do you pivot? Don't get stuck." Right? So the quality of flexibility of like not getting down on they a lot of anxiety disorder therapists are perfectionists and they don't want to harm people and they really are invested in wanting to do well by their clients because there's nothing more rewarding than helping someone get their life back, right? That's what's so addictive about working with anxiety disorders. When you do it well, lives completely transform and you're like, "Ooh, I like doing this work." But you have to be flexible and open.
Yeah. Um, and I love that about this community, and maybe it's with every uh, therapy type community, but the more senior therapists in this community seem to want to help the younger therapists, like bring them along. It's just kind of maybe it's because maybe it's with everybody again, but some of it I think has to do with this particular subject, OCD, and how debilitating the disorder is and how uh, destructive it can be to people's lives. So your community does a really good job of bringing younger people on. So when you're supervising young therapists, um, I I love that. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over this, but it's really I'm just trying to compliment your people, your senior people in this. I love that you reach out and you give them little tidbits about finding purpose,
Hmm.
how to stay in the game, because I know it can be exhausting. It can be scary too, because you deal with a lot of scary situations.
Hmm.
And sometimes you might go to lay your head on your pillow at night and go, why am I doing this?
Hmm.
Right? It's tough. Right. So that I think that flexibility piece of advice is really helpful. Right. Just keep
I
rowing
think
down the stream.
I think it's that. I also think that the reason you are seeing senior people go come into the tent is because there were 200 of us and we're like, this sucks. There's a ton, millions of people that need help and we are not enough. So we want more people in and if our value is to help as many people as possible. So I think that's one of the kind of impetus of that. The other thing that happens in this community though, because there still aren't enough communities, is that what was unique for me is that when you got trained in dialectical behavior therapy, you could only do that modality as part of a treatment team. And so you worked with other people, you had a consultation team that you went to that you got support. And so that whole thing of like, this is hard. I don't know if what I'm doing is helpful. That was built into that treatment modality. That again was part of why I built the business that I built. All of these private practitioners who are well-intended, halfway trained, want to get better are like, I don't know if I'm doing it right. And I'm a little kind of afraid to raise my hand. And so they're all kind of floating out there by themselves. And I'm like, this work is really hard. So I run small groups, I build communities, I teach people how to run small groups. Their therapists have to have a place to go in order to get consultation or to get support. To do it on your own is nuts.
I have one more question before we go into the Q&A, and I've got a few questions in the chat that I'll read to you. Uh, and then I have one question after the Q&A. But this question, it's always tough for, I think, people to answer this because it requires you to like say, this is what I want people to think about me in a positive way, but I want you to answer it. When you reflect on your time, and you've got any number of hats, you've worn hats, many hats, clinician, educator, author, advocate, executive director. What do you hope your work has meant to the OCD community?
Um, I'm so not ego driven, honestly.
I know it'd be tough for you to answer this.
Yeah,
So
when you're saying like, oh, how many people might show up, and I'm like, I don't care. I don't know that I want credit for it. I just like that it's happening, right? Like the things that fill me up, great collaboration, creativity, um, improvement, evolution, that stuff. When I see that, I'm like, ooh, I was part of that. I know I'm part of that because those are my values, and I'm seeing that in the community. But do I want credit for it? I just like that it's there.
Yeah, that's okay because we're all going to talk about you in a positive way anyway. So we're all going to give you credit. Um, okay, first question for you. Where can we access Jeff's writings in addition to the Perfectionist Handbook? Where I move and you actually use this as a platform. I want you to tell people if they want more information about what you do, this is where they find it. If there's a therapist out there who feels like they are interested in reaching out to you in your role as a consultant, how do they do that? But please, yet let us know how people can reach out to you.
Um, wow. I've done like tons of presentations, media stuff, podcasts. I haven't done a ton of writing. I did a lot of writing at the foundation, but it's all the foundation's material now, right? That's
Right.
their intellectual property. That was my intellectual property. Um, I think my bent was of the four audiences was to go, the therapist community doesn't have enough support, doesn't have enough training, doesn't have enough all of that stuff. And so I kind of pivoted in that direction. And so yeah, getting to the next level, you can Google it. Um, if you want to hire me as a consultant. But yeah, God, I kind of let everyone take all my stuff. Like,
Yeah, I was almost going to answer that because I kind of knew what the answer to this question was. I was just going to like suggest, go to iocdf.org and you'll see your
mhm,
thumbprint on much of what is
yeah,
there,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And I will tell you though that a lot of the perspectives and concepts that you've talked about today, I haven't really seen, like grouped like you've put it. So there, if I could encourage you, when you have time, and I know you don't have time, but if you have time, it might be time for another Jeff Szymanski, publication out there because this is really important stuff. I think it's earth changing, earth shifting type stuff that you're talking about.
Hmm.
Um, so, and I think
Yeah,
people would be interested.
yeah, and not to get into the specifics of it, but there were two reasons that I left the foundation. One is that I wanted to go and do this training in this particular way, and the second is I wanted to do this training in this particular way. And the foundation has a lot of perspectives and a lot of folks to like pay attention to. And over time, I felt like this voice in my evolution of how I thought things were going, I couldn't have that voice there. So some of what you see is there, and some of what you're hearing me say wasn't encouraged to be there. So that's cool. You guys do that, but then I'm going to go do this. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's a little bit of a parting of company, which is okay. Like, different people can have different perspectives, and you go towards the people that you resonate with.
All right, this next question is a little bit long, um, and you can decide whether you can, hey, this is probably way too complex for me to even try to step into here, but I'll read it and you can field it or let it roll to the outfield, whatever you want. My husband is one that no one wants to or can work with. He has severe OCD. He has also had physical symptoms that I feel have come from the medications, and OCD itself. The doctors don't seem to know where it is coming from. They just throw another medication our way. He now cannot, he now cannot be worked with at a residential treatment facility because he isn't independent physically to do it. And the doctors in the medical field won't work with his OCD. We are in a cycle of hell that never ends. On top of it, um, he's at the only residential place that will work with insurances, and it is across the country from us. And there's a 3 month wait. All the other residential programs will send us into bankruptcy in order to do something. a little closer to home. There's a comment about me helping. I know who these people are. Me helping them. I won't read that. But we are still hitting walls everywhere we turn. Question is, how and where do we turn for help? We've already lost 6 years of both of our lives to OCD. So it's kind of this situation that we kind of talked about before is nothing is working.
Mm-hmm.
I'm losing all hope.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? And it's not, and the answer wouldn't be, well, you need to like see a therapist because they're in there. And she wrote this question, so I read it. Um, your thoughts? Maybe there's other people thinking like this too.
Yeah, I mean, when it's complicated and there are physical components to it, right? And again, physicians don't want to sometimes get into mental health, and mental health people aren't allowed to get into physical stuff. But we can encourage people to advocate for themselves in the medical community. And so that's a lot of what I do. You're on that medication, you've gained 30 pounds. There are 8 other medications you can try that work just as well. Tell your psychiatrist you want to try a different medication, right? So our job is in the mental health world is how do we help them find the assertiveness in the words, and sometimes, let me talk to your psychiatrist and see if I can persuade them that they're seeing you once every 6 months. I'm seeing you, an hour or two every week, and I'm seeing a very different profile than the psychiatrist is seeing. I I think it is persistence. I think it also is kind of going back to the same thing, like to say to the providers, what are we doing that's different? Right? If like, great that you tried this, but now we're like this much time in, can we pivot into what is the other step? Right? If this is a straight exposure therapy approach and he's not really resonating with it, do we need more ACT? Do we need more inference-based cognitive behavior therapy? Um, do we need another psychiatric consult? But you're right, there are 2 residential facilities in the country that take insurance. And there are only a handful beyond that. What I'm doing with some people is I'm working with a number of clinic owners developing an intensive outpatient program, meaning that they will set up like a 3-week program, and it's meeting with a client an hour or two every day for 5 days a week for 3 weeks. And that will allow them to get enough progress, maybe to make that extra leap in residential, or it can be a step down out of residential care. So when we think of levels of care, trying to get more of these, there's formal intensive outpatient programs and there's formal partial hospital programs that they call them, but these more informal IOPs you're going to see start showing up. And again, there are these step ins and step downs. But yeah, the best I can say is persistence and to continue to say what we've been trying isn't working. Can we please try something else? There are other options out
All right, that's helpful. That's helpful. I may reach out to you anyway on this, just to um, I'll leave it there. Next question. This is another long one. Our 19-year-old son was recently diagnosed with severe OCD and is currently receiving residential treatment. Um, this has been a life-changing season for, let me put my glasses on. So, sorry. I turned 63 years old this year. That's not fair. This has been a life-changing season for our family. Question one, how can we help reinforce his values and encourage him to envision the life he would like to have when he is struggling to see that right now? And then question two, what would you share with parents who are trying to support their child without being reassuring or saying the wrong thing?
there. So, I mentioned those books earlier, Ellie Leibovitz. He wrote it for parents of kids, but the structure of it still makes sense, particularly if the person's living with you, right? And it's all about the do's and don'ts. It's about how to not accommodate, but you also don't criticize, you also don't blame, you also don't withdraw. It's really about empathizing and saying, I get it. What you're dealing with is really hard. And you also know that when you're asking me to do these other things, that doesn't work. And so is there something else I can do? Flexibility, you're going to hear this over. Is
Yeah.
there anything else I can do in this moment that would be helpful to you? Like, I want to cheerlead you. I want to, like, can we, go on the internet and look at pictures of the house that you want or the job that you want? Or, like, how do we scroll through your phone and look at pictures of, your kids that you get to see next week because you're divorced? Like, whatever it is, how can we make your values more present? What can we do in this moment? But what we've been doing isn't working. And if we try something else, I just want to encourage you to be open and see if the different behavior has better outcomes. When you're working with kids, Ellie Leibovitz argues like you want to say, I get that this is hard and I'm confident you can do it. I think that's harder. Of course, you should say that, but I think that's harder when you're 45 and you've been dealing with this for 20 years. It's like, ugh,
Right.
I'm pretty demoralized. But sometimes you hold that hope and you hold that confidence for them, even when it's hard for them to access themselves.
Okay. I'm going to double check the gallery here. I don't see any hands. All right. Let me come back to you. Um, I have one final question for you. Um, and then we'll close out. Uh, for everybody watching, people with OCD, their loved ones, fellow therapists, if you could leave them with one message of encouragement, what would that be?
I do think the field is changing, the field is evolving, and it's evolving because of the original wisdom of the foundation. That the degree to which you advocate and you participate and you are part of this community, the degree to which you influence it and you influence it for in the right direction. The more you participate, the faster it goes, the better we get. And it takes time, and so it takes patience. But the more people participate, the better we all get together as a group.
Yeah, so I I appreciate so much you taking the time on a Sunday to participate in this series. I call it Rise Beyond OCD, but it really is interviews with the icons of the recovery community. It's Shannon's dream team of people, probably a few other people that I should put on here, and that I'll be working on that. But and you mentioned to me that the one person who's not on here that should be is Dr. Michael Janicki. Like I mentioned to you and Michael at the very beginning about my book, for people who don't know, Dr. Janicki read my transcript after he told me he wasn't really going to read it. And he was like, "Hey, I think people really need to see what you're writing about. What can I do?" And I said, "Would you mind writing the foreword for the book?" And it doesn't have to be long. I was trying to be respectful of his time, and he did. And so, if anybody is interested to know what Michael Janicki has to say, just in relation to me, it's in that forward. He, maybe more than anybody I know, has really changed the trajectory of OCD treatment forever. It set it on, and he is missed. And I know he was close to you, and again, years after his death, it's just my condolences about that. Jeff, I really appreciate your time. You had a huge impact on my life. Um, for the audience, I'll be interviewing Jeff Bell on February 8th and then Dr. Randy Frost on February 22nd. And then there's more to follow if you look at the lineup that I put on my Facebook page. I'm really proud of this series. I think collectively it will be another thing that helps take OCD recovery in a positive trajectory, to use that term again. So thank you so much for your time. I
I
really
want to say
appreciate it.
one more thing because you brought it up before, because we still have a couple minutes.
Oh, you're
Um,
good.
about books. So we gave a service award to a board member 2012 maybe, and she was the mother of a kid with OCD. And she said, my kid was diagnosed in the late 90s. And when I heard the diagnosis, I went to the bookstore and I went to find all the books on OCD, and there was one. And in the late 90s, there was literally one book on OCD. So one of my recommendations is go on Amazon, type in OCD. There are thousands of books,
Yeah.
self-help in different genres. memoirs, inspirational, all kinds of stuff. There was one 25 years ago. There's just a treasure trove of excellent books out there that are super helpful.
That is true. Yeah. So thank you, sir. I really appreciate your time. Enjoy the snow up in Boston, and um, I'll be in touch.
Always great to see
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you too. All right. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.